have been involved in direct combat against the transitional government here in Syria known as HTS. I'm going to talk about that in this live, and we're going to talk about just the complexities and the absolute brutal fighting that's happening in many places of this country that we're here to take a look at. I'll be here for another several days. And so thank you very much for watching CBN. Let's talk real quick about what's happening we'll start in Damascus tonight. So just south of Damascus, there are suburbs that are primarily Druze. Now you recall the Druze are a kind of a sect of Islam, and they're very insular. They kind of keep to themselves, and they have been kind of at odds with Sunni Muslims for a long time. Excuse me while I hit focus on this so people won't call and disturb me. Lots of flies out here. So the Druze have gotten into clashes today with HTS. And if you go over to my website, chuckholton.com, I've put videos of those clashes up on the website where you can see them. There are a lot of videos coming out from the suburbs of Damascus of the fighting that's going on there. But unfortunately, I can't show them to you on YouTube or they would demonetize us. So there's that. But while you're watching, please do me a favor and just post where you're watching from. What that does is it tells YouTube's algorithm that more people need to see this content when there's a lot of chats going by. And so we do like to see where you're watching from as well. So thank you very much for that. And a special shout out today to my lovely wife, Connie, on our 31st wedding anniversary. I'm stuck in Syria as Connie is in Panama, and hopefully I'll be able to see her in, I don't know, a week or so by the time I get home. So first, let's back up a little bit and let's talk about, man, there's people from all over the place. Florida, Canada, Valencia, Spain. Whoa, Alberta, Canada, Pennsylvania. That's great. Bethlehem, Texas. Linville Falls, North Carolina. That's really cool. Thank you very much for watching the Hot Zone. And see, we already jacked up the number of people watching to over 700 people because a lot of people are being shown this video now because you're putting quotes or putting comments in the chat box. So thank you for doing that. Also, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And that also tells the algorithm more people need to be watching this content. So I've been in Syria now for 4 days, something like that, 4 or 5 days, I don't know. And it's very rare that I get a chance to do a live broadcast from here. And I'm very reticent to do live broadcasts while I'm in Syria because of the operational security aspect. If I'm going live on the air, showing where I am right now at this moment, then bad people could see that and could come after us. And we certainly have our share of enemies here in Syria. The places we've been driving through are still just hotbeds of the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, and all kinds of not so savory Smurfs, as we used to call them, characters that would just love to commit some kind of shenanigans against our little band of humanitarians with the Free Burma Rangers. So we have to be very, very careful about giving away our location. And that's why I'm up against a wall instead of showing you something. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful views around here, but I can't really show them to you. Otherwise, they could give our position away. We got to be real careful about that. But suffice it to say, I'm in northeast Syria. We've been traveling around the country for the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 days. And here's what we've been finding. There are actually 2 pretty major conflicts going on in Syria as we speak. And it's all convoluted. There's so many factions that are all fighting against each other. And so I'm going to try to break it down for you and help you understand very simply what's actually happening in Syria, okay? So you have the normal Syrian people. They're wonderful people and they just want to live in peace. That just like everywhere, when you find normal people, it's very rare that they are going to be hostile to you just right off the bat. And Syrians are especially hospitable and generous, and even the poorest of them will give you everything they have. Matter of fact, don't ever compliment somebody in Syria on anything that they have. Like, hey, I just made that mistake a minute ago with the or armed guard that's over here. Um, he has a hat on, and I wish I could show it to you because he looks really cool. But I was like, hey, nice hat. And he was like, oh, you want it? You want it? If you compliment them on anything they have, they'll just give it to you. And they almost won't take no for an answer. I mean, it's hard to turn them down. They really are serious. Like, you can have it. If you like it, it's yours. And so very kind people, but there are a very diverse community across Syria, a bunch of communities actually. And we're talking about, okay, you have the majority, which are Sunni Muslim. You have some Shia Muslims, like the Alawites are aligned with the Shia. You have Druze, which, as I mentioned, are kind of a offshoot of Islam. You have, well, I mean, and the Alawites even celebrate some Christian holidays. It's kind of weird. And you've got Kurds, you've got Yazidis, you've got Armenian Christians, Syriac Christians, you've got Chaldean Christians. I mean, there's just so many different communities here, and they're all ancient. They're all very, very ancient communities. And typically they've lived together and they have their squabbles, but I mean, these guys they just want to live their lives. They want to be left alone like everybody does. However, you've got people with dreams, visions of grandeur who whip up the zealots among them. And then you get into what I would consider mob rule or mob mentality, where large groups of people, when they get whipped up into a fervor, will do things that in everyday life, in their homes or villages, they would never dream of doing. Like, you know, just taking out somebody on the street, or running people over, or just all the things that we see. And of course, it doesn't help that Islam in this region has gotten more and more radical as time has gone on. Syria, for the most part, even under the former dictator Bashar al-Assad and his father Hafez al-Assad, it was a brutal dictatorship, but they were pretty progressive in terms of, just human rights when it came to women's, like, women not having to wear a burqa everywhere. Most do nowadays, but you see plenty of plenty of women out that are not wearing a burqa, and those ones are probably the Christians or the Kurds, because Kurds don't play that game. Even though most Kurds are Sunni Muslims, they're very tolerant and progressive for Islam, and again, just wonderful people. So their women actually get treated very well, and do not, by and large, go around with head coverings or anything like that. And they're just lovely women. I mean, we went yesterday to a military base and talked to some female soldiers, Kurdish soldiers. And they, of course, they're all like my daughter's age, but wow, just lovely, very exotic, beautiful girls. And you can imagine how heartbreaking it would be for those girls to get captured by HTS or ISIS or Al Qaeda or the Syrian National Army. And we'll go into all those guys here shortly. And I asked them about that, and they said, we won't be captured. We'll be killed. We won't allow ourselves to be captured. So yeah, I say, Andy, I say exotic just because, you know, like they're olive skin with like bright green eyes or bright or blue eyes, and just a combination you don't normally see. And they're hardcore. I mean, you don't mess with those girls. They could probably beat up you and me both if they wanted to. Any of those girls, they're brave and tough. But they shouldn't have to be fighting for their country. They should be having babies and, you know, populating their country. But they've been having to fight for more than 14 years now. And so right now, the country of Syria is divided up into, somebody's shooting over here. Oh, I know what they're doing. They're taking target practice back there over that direction. I always have to be careful when you hear gunfire out here. So Syria is divided up into three main areas. The eastern portion of Syria, east of the Euphrates River, is controlled by the Kurds and has been since about 2017. The western portion of Syria is controlled by, you hear all that gunfire over there, they're sighting in their rifles over there. The western part of Syria is controlled by now an organization called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS. Now, HTS started out as Al-Qaeda. They were an arm of Al-Qaeda, and HTS isn't a new organization. They've been around since 2017 as HTS. But many, if not most of those guys share an ideology with the Islamic State. They are radical Islamists. There's no question about that. Now, they are trying very hard to put on a different face, to change their clothes and shorten their beards and make it seem to the world like they're civilized. And by and large, the world is swallowing that one hook, line, and sinker right now. And I can tell you from being here, it is not that way. HTS is a brutal Islamist, Salafist, extremist organization. They are considered to be a terrorist group by the United States, the UK, even by Turkey. Now, we'll talk a minute about how Turkey is supporting the violence that's happening across Syria. But now you have a portion of Syria down in the southern, the southwestern tip, which touches Israel, that now is being held by Israel. And they've pushed in and have taken a buffer zone and are planning to keep it for the time being. Now, with that in mind, the Druze would love to link up with the Israelis and even become Israelis. They want that whole southern part of Syria to become like a self-governing protectorate of Israel, which is not going to happen likely, but those guys want to ally themselves with Israel. And Israel apparently wants to ally themselves with the Druze, because today, when HTS troops started moving into Druze neighborhoods and there were some very big firefights, guess who came to the rescue? The IDF, or the IAF, I guess you'd say, the Israeli Air Force. They came and started bombing HTS troops. Now, up to this point, after Bashar al-Assad fell in December 24th or whenever that was of last year, he was deposed. He fled to Moscow, and he's still in Russia. And HTS declared themselves the new not caliphate, but the new leadership in Syria. Now, when that happened, things started to change around the country. And a lot of that was partially facilitated and orchestrated by Turkey. Now, Turkey of course, wants to sort of become the center of a new Islamic caliphate under President Erdogan. And he's straight up Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS supporter, and we have proof of that. They have given hundreds of, well, I don't know, tens of millions of dollars at least to the Islamic State when it was still the Islamic State and had their caliphate. Even though they publicly said that they were against the Islamic State, they worked with them and they actually took in a bunch of former Islamic State fighters when the Islamic State was being whittled down by the Kurds and the Iraqis and the United States and Russia and Bashar al-Assad's army back in, what, 2019, I guess. Now, with that in mind, the new Syria is actually kind of, the strings are being pulled by Turkey because, and this is where it gets real complicated. So Turkey has its own proxies in, yeah, those popping noises are gunfire. It's right off in the distance over here to my left. And so don't worry about that. They're not shooting at me. And they're just apparently taking target practice with some of their weapons. But so it's nothing to worry about. It's just the sounds of Syria. This is what you get all across Syria right now. That is gunfire, yes. So again, here's where it gets complicated. The Turks have their own proxies in Syria. They also have their own troops in Syria, and they've had their Turkish troops here for years. They've had them here for a long time. But the Turkish proxies in Syria were once the Islamic State, then they became the Free Syrian Army, FSA, and now they've rebranded themselves as the Syrian National Army, the SNA. But the Syrian National Army is not connected to HTS or the current ruling party in Damascus. They are completely separate and really kind of competitors here. They're competing for control of Syria. Turkey would like to have de facto control over Syria through its proxies, and it's working to try to affect that. In the meantime, Turkey is whoa, just had a ricochet come right this way. Hey guys, careful! The ricochet is coming this way. I'm going to have to move in a minute. So Turkey has been directly attacking the Kurds and the Yazidis and the HTS forces, and like Turkey's been attacking a lot of people. As a matter of fact, when the SNA takes over an area, they do it with Turkish armor, artillery, and air support. So we went to a dam the other day, the large, dam on the Euphrates River. It's called the Tishreen Dam, and it's been the scene of some very heavy fighting over the past few months since December. And hundreds of people have been killed at that dam. As a matter of fact, some of our Free Burma Rangers were there as it was being bombed by Turkey, and they were in tunnels underground, 60 feet underground, and they said they thought they were done for because they were dropping 3,000-pound bombs on all the buildings around the dam. They didn't drop any on the dam itself, but they did hit the dam with drones that knocked out the power generators in the dam. So it's not functioning, or at least not fully functioning right now. Everybody's giving me advice. I'm here, you're not. If I'm not safe, I will move. I promise. Don't worry. If I go down, send an ambulance. I don't know. I'm fine. They're not actually shooting this direction. They're shooting like that direction. So it should be okay, but they just had a couple of bounces. No, I'm not a target. So as Turkey was bombing the Tishreen Dam, the people, what they did was they knocked out power to over 400,000 people in cities like Manbij and Kobani. And when they did that, then the Syrian National Army, the SNA forces, backed by Turkey, pushed into Manbij and took that city. It's a large city. I've been there. And when the SNA pushed in there, they pushed all the Kurdish forces out. The Kurds had to flee Manbij. It had been held by the Kurds since 2016, so it's primarily Kurds and at least in control there up until that point. If I'm live, show 3 fingers. Okay, I'm live. This is live. And so the Kurds fled from Manbij. The Syrian National Army came in and took over, again with the help of Turkey. And when that happened, we interviewed a guy who is still living in Manbij, and he escaped, came out and met with us and told us what was going on inside, and then went back because his family is still there. And he said everything changed overnight. And those guys came in. Now the women have to sit in the back of the bus and the men in the front. Everything's segregated, men on one side, women on the other. They don't get to mingle at all. Women have to wear the full ninja suit, all the full drapery. And it's Sharia law. Okay, well, that is exactly what HTS wants as well. As a matter of fact, in Damascus and Homs, places like that HTS has taken over, it's that they're doing the same thing. They are instituting Sharia law. Well, you can imagine what that is going to make life like for Christians and Kurds and Yazidis and Druze and Alawites and anybody else that's on their naughty list. So with that in mind, Turkey is the one that's behind all this. I mean, having said all that, look, if the Syrian National Army is pushing in and the only way they can win is with air support from Turkey, then the Kurds are not fighting the SNA. They're fighting Turkey. And the Turkey's just recruited a bunch of yahoos from here in Syria to do their bidding. Same thing with HTS. Now, this is where it gets real complicated. The Syrian National Army and HTS share the same ideology. They share the same belief system. They share the same goals. They want Sharia law, but they don't necessarily want to work together. They have their own internal divisions. So when it's expedient for them, they will sometimes work together. When it's not, then they'll fight each other. So basically, you have everybody fighting everybody out here. Like I said, we went out to that dam a couple days ago, and it's, again, all of the buildings around the dam are just flattened, just absolutely flattened. And the horrible thing about that is that most of those buildings had bomb shelters in the basements. So the people that lived in the buildings went into the bomb shelters, and then Turkey flattened the building on top of them so that they can't get out. And it would take months to dig them all out of there. And so those people just died of starvation and exposure in there. And so they don't really even know how many people died and again, this was killed by Turkey. So if you go to the dam itself, now there are hundreds of people living in the dam. Okay, so they're like where the dam is built across the Euphrates River, very large structure, as most dams are. And on one side of the dam, there are a bunch of apartments, I guess, built into the dam, probably for the workers, the people that are working at the dam, and the offices and stuff like that. But since the dam is no longer operational from an electricity standpoint, they are, yeah, okay, I see your question about Tusi TV. Thank you very much. If you prefer them, go watch Tusi TV. Please hit the like button while you're at it, folks. So there, a bunch of civilians moved into the dam, and they're now living in the dam. And they're living in the dam because they're acting as human shields voluntarily. They figure if there's a bunch of women and kids and stuff living in the dam, then Turkey's not going to bomb the dam and destroy it for good. As it is right now, it's damaged but repairable. But if Turkey were to blow that dam, it could wipe out people all down the Euphrates River Valley for dozens of miles down there, okay? And so these people have decided to guard the dam with their bodies, and they just go and live there, and every day they go up on top of the dam and they dance and sing and wave flags and cheer and everything. And that is meant to keep Turkey from destroying the dam. Well, guess what happened today? Turkey bombed the dam again. They didn't destroy the dam, but they did conduct airstrikes against the civilians that were there. And I don't have word on the number of casualties or anything like that. One tired mama says, if Turkey blew the dam, would anyone care and retaliate? Not really. I mean, it would. There'd be some international opprobrium against Turkey for that. I'm sure that most civilized nations in the world would condemn Turkey for blowing a very important piece of infrastructure that's very important to the people in the region. I mean, they get their drinking water and their electricity from that dam, or at least they did. And Turkey is now trying to cut off water from the Euphrates into Syria, and it's made a very big problem for the people in this part of northeast Syria, because their water comes out of Turkey, and they've dammed it up and stopped the flow. So the Euphrates, right now at springtime, it's higher than it had been, but not as high as it would be normally. And when Turkey tries to cut the flow, the water level in the Euphrates goes way down where you could just walk across the whole thing, which the Euphrates is a very large river. Actually, it's probably up to a mile across in many places. And so it's not quite, Mississippi, but getting there, pretty close, like the Ohio River or something like that. How is Turkey coming against U.S. allies? Turkey is considered an ally, but U.S. is allowing this. Well, they're only allowing it to a point. Now, Turkey says they're just fighting terrorism because Turkey, there's a organization of Kurds that's called the PKK, and it's the Kurdish Workers' Party. They are straight up communist, very, very hard left, and they have committed acts of terror inside Turkey because there are a lot of Kurds, millions of them, who live in Turkey, and they want freedom from Turkey. They want to have their own country, and so they want it to be a Marxist country. So they have been for years conducting terror attacks inside Turkey. So Turkey's like, we're going to wipe out all the Kurds and not have this problem anymore. And Turkey says that all the Kurds are PKK. Well, that's not true. You talk to most Kurds and they're like, we wish those guys would knock it off. As a matter of fact, just recently, the PKK said they would lay down their arms and demilitarize in the face of the threats from HTS, etc. What the Kurds are trying to do is hold on to this region. So this area that they've controlled since 2017 is called, they call it Rojava. And it's a very wide swath of Turkey, a lot of land, big enough they could make their own country if they wanted to. But most Kurds are not into the whole communist thing, just the PKK. And the PKK is the real radical arm of the Kurdish people. And there are others, but I mean, there's like 39 political parties in Kurdistan. So it's very complex. And I don't even understand it all. But the Turks go to the United States and say, we're just fighting terrorism. Well, what they're really doing is they're just trying to kill everybody, just drive everybody out of this region, because they're not just going after the PKK. They're not just going after the Kurds. They're going after everyone that lives in the northern part of Syria. They want to create a buffer zone inside Syria. And so they want to push everybody out of the region where I'm standing right now. This is a pocket where I am at the moment. It's a pocket of Syrian Christians. Many of them are Armenian Christians who were part of the Armenian genocide. You know, their ancestors in 1915 were driven out of Turkey and were pushed south into Syria on about a 900-mile march. Turkey's idea was the Ottomans, they would just march these people until they died, just march them to death. And so they marched them across the desert, and they just wouldn't die. So the people would fall out, Turkish soldiers would come up and shoot them, or as the procession of Armenians were going by, there were Arabs and Kurds coming up to the procession and picking out the young girls and taking them back to their harems. This is just 1915. I mean, there's still people around that remember this stuff. And all in all, more than 1.5 million Armenians were killed, but not just Armenians. They killed Greek Orthodox Christians. They killed Syriac Christians. They killed Chaldean Christians and Maronite Christians, okay? So all of them were a part of that genocide. Well, they marched right through the valley where I'm standing, pretty close by here. And when they did, there were people that took them in. They would escape, and there were people, for whatever reason, that didn't agree with what the Ottomans were doing, and so they took in the Armenians and sheltered them and hid them. Once the Ottoman Empire dissolved and these people formed their own villages all around where I'm standing. And so there are a ton of Armenian Christians. We've already passed a couple of churches on our way here today. And the Armenian Christians have been persecuted more recently by Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State. Yeah, those people behind me are part of our group. They're the ones that were out taking target practice. So they're fine. Don't worry about it. They're our people. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that. So the Armenians that live in this area have continued to be persecuted as Christians in this region. And they had to band together and form militias to be able to fight for their own freedom and fight for their rights. And they're still doing it. So those people are, so they're some of the most resilient people you'll ever meet. These Armenians that live here, they speak Western Armenian. The people in Armenia speak Eastern Armenian, so it's a slightly different dialect. I think it's probably like if you came from Wisconsin and went to Georgia. Maybe a little worse than that. But they can kind of understand each other, but not totally. Whoops, just kicked my camera. So these poor Armenians had to band together and fight ISIS. And now HTS is saying, we're going to take over this area. And so they just had a kind of a council in a place called Kamishli about 3-4 days ago, the 26th. And they met with HTS representatives. They met with actually the US had some people there. The Kurds had their leader there, Muslim Abdi. And they tried to hash out an agreement that would be suitable for all parties. Well, that didn't happen. They did come up with a tentative ceasefire, and that ceasefire has not held. The Turks have continued to attack every day. They attacked today out at Tishreen Dam. They've had drone strikes every day. We've been here. And that's one thing that we're very worried about is the drone strikes on our own convoys. That happened on one of our trips to Syria, and one of our medics was killed. Killed by a Turkish drone. Dropped a bomb on an ambulance just like this one. clearly marked as an ambulance, away from everything else, not next to a military target or anything. They intentionally targeted a marked ambulance and killed one of our medics with a bomb dropped from a drone. So you can imagine that I'm not real excited about Turkey, and for good reason. Okay, Turkey is behind the vast majority of the violence that's taking place in Syria today. And I think you can take that to the bank, and if you don't get anything else from this video, just take that away and you'll understand the point of this video. It's just to make that clear. I got that information from various sources, but I just spoke to one of the commanders of the militia that was formed by the Armenians. This guy is a Syriac Christian himself, speaks English, and I'll have quotes from him in my CBN reporting when we get that out. But this guy, his name's Aram, and he's a wonderful, wonderful guy. And his family, going back generations, has been just persecuted and persecuted and persecuted. They were part of that Armenian genocide. And he told me everything I just told you. Turkey is behind it all. There's no real difference between HTS and the Syrian National Army, even though they are not allies, really. The only difference is that the Syrian National Army has full backing from Turkey, and HTS is considered to be a terrorist group by Turkey. So go figure. Two groups with the exact same ideology, the exact same objectives, and Turkey says one of them's a terrorist group and the other one's their friends. Go figure. I don't know. So didn't Erdogan say he wanted to destroy Israel? Yes, he did. Erdogan has said that many times. And he's even talked about sending troops down to Israel. And that's why when Russia vacated military bases in this region, back in, January, I guess, just last month, the Turks decided they were going to send Turkish troops to take over those bases, which are very close to Damascus. And Israel said, no, I don't think so. And they bombed those bases to smithereens. They did that to keep Turkey from being able to get hold of that area, okay? Now, that's also why they are encouraging the Druze to rise up. The Druze are now saying, because HTS forces have moved into Druze neighborhoods and started executing civilians today, so nice guys there. The Druze are saying they may have to have a general mobilization of every military age male and go to war with HTS. Israel had drones completely circling Damascus all day today, and they made at least 3 airstrikes against HTS. Now, that's the first time that Israel has directly targeted and gone to battle against HTS. And they're doing it to try to save the Druze civilians in southern Damascus, because HTS's forces are going in there and machine gunning people. So the face that HTS presents to the world is fake. Don't believe it for a second. HTS is ISIS, and there's actually still ISIS all around here, like real ISIS. You know, people that never quit being ISIS, never changed their name or anything. They still call themselves the Islamic State. They're all over this area. Every time we stop, we got to be very careful. We got to, kind of keep security out so we don't get ambushed. Today, one of our guys went for a run in Raqqa when we were there earlier today, and he ran right smack into an ISIS guy coming down the street, and the ISIS guy was more surprised than he was, and his eyes got real big, and he looked around. This guy's obviously an American, and the ISIS guy jumped in his car and then closed the door and rolled the window up. And Dave just went walking by and then turned around and looked back, and the guy was looking at it. And then when he saw him looking at him again, he just drove off as fast as he could. We were followed today by, I don't know who it was. There was a van that followed us for a long time today across. We were getting a little worried, to the point where we were starting to make plans for what we would have to do if we had to take that guy out, or if we got ambushed or something like that. This is a very unstable situation here in Syria. Pray for the people of Syria, especially pray for our brothers and sisters in Christ who live all around where I'm standing. There are lots of Christians here, but not near as many as there once were. And they are some of the most ancient Christian sects in the world. So everybody's like, please leave, it's not safe. Well, I wouldn't be a very good war correspondent if I wouldn't go to war zones, would I? Right? And I've been doing this for 22 years. Like I said, this is my 31st wedding anniversary today, and I plan to go home and see my wife. I always buy a round trip ticket when I come to these places, and I wouldn't come in here if I didn't have a plan for getting back out. So thank you for your concern, but don't worry. I've done this many times before. This is about my 6th time in Syria. And so thank you for your concern, but we're good. We got a great team of guys here, and we can take care of ourselves pretty well. So just a little bit about what I'm here doing. I'm not actually here as a journalist, although I'm doing journalism right now, but I'm here with the Free Burma Rangers. If you haven't heard of FBR, the Free Burma Rangers, I know we're not in Burma, but they started in Burma and now they're everywhere, a lot of places. The Free Burma Rangers is a humanitarian aid organization that is made to go into the gap that exists between, in any war zone, between the point of need and the point of care. What I mean is, the front lines are the place where people are getting shot, and there's always civilians involved. Believe it or not, civilians don't, they very often just don't leave when the war comes their way. And they don't leave because they don't know how to leave, and they don't have any resources to leave. They don't know where they would go. They've never been anywhere, right? So they just stay, and then the war kind of overwhelms them, and then they're the ones that are getting shot and their homes destroyed and animals, livestock killed, and all this stuff that happens in war. The problem is they usually have to get themselves to the first point of care, whether that's a hospital or a refugee center, something like that, refugee camp. And that could be a 4-hour drive. It could be 1,000 yards. Just depends on the combat. Well, the reason there's a gap there is because the Red Cross has policies that won't allow their people to go right into the front lines where there's shooting going on. The United Nations, all of their organizations, they can't go in there and rescue people directly out of the combat. And so we have, through the help of our donors, we have a great fleet of these armored vehicles. These are all armored, bulletproof, every one of them. We have like 11 of them, and they're outfitted as ambulances, and we bring medical supplies in. Most of us are former special operations, or at least former military, led by a guy named Dave Eubank. He's been doing this for more than 30 years. And we go into that gap to rescue people who need rescuing and get them to the first point of care, and try to keep them alive along the way. And I've been a part of the Free Burma Rangers for almost half of their existence, almost 15 years now. Started out just reporting on them, and then I was like, no, I want to do this. So about once a year, I go somewhere with the Free Burma Rangers and do a mission. And this year's mission is here in Syria. And boy, things are really ramping up after we got here. We thought it was going to be a pretty quiet mission, but man, there's a lot of fighting going on. Somebody asked, do I have PTSD from combat or what you had to endure? I believe that my faith helps me to deal with the trauma that I've experienced. I don't see it as a disorder. I think post-traumatic stress is a natural response to trauma. And so I'm not suffering from post-traumatic stress. Yes, I have nightmares and I have trouble sleeping. And when I get home from a trip like this, I'm not allowed to drive for a couple of weeks because my wife has to drive me around because I tend to drive like I'm still in a combat zone. And that's a good way to get shot in the United States. So in order to keep the marital peace, my wife drives for the first couple of weeks after I get back from a trip like this. And I talk about it. And I think talking about it is the best medicine. So I'm actually reporting on the bad things that are happening. And that in and of itself is cathartic, kind of keeps it from, harming me permanently. And thank you for that question. I certainly have had problems in the past where I've really struggled with some of the manifestations of the trauma that I've seen. And I've learned to deal with it. I've become somewhat inured to the pain and suffering that I experience or see out here. That's not really a good thing, but it certainly helps me to keep from being too excitable or excited in a crisis situation. So now, if you have any other questions, folks, put them in all caps. It makes it a lot easier for me to see them as they go flying by. I'm going to answer a couple questions, then I'm going to go. Yes, that's gunfire off to the left over there. Some of our people are out there taking target practice right now. If you'd like to support the Free Burma Rangers, you can do that at just Google Free Burma Rangers, go to their website, and you can support them over there. But I would encourage you to support CBN as well, because wouldn't be able to bring this news to you if it wasn't for CBN paying for my travel to get here. And so I would really appreciate it. It'd be a great favor to me if you would go to cbn.com and become a supporter over there. You can also find out more about my reporting by going to the Hot Zone here on YouTube. I'm doing reporting over there almost every day. And you can also go to my website at chuckholton.com. Don't forget to change your socks. I just did, actually, just changed my socks. Denisha says, I have PTSD. I want to get better, but it's hard to seek something because it's current. Well, if I could give you some advice, Denisha, just talk about it a lot. But don't be afraid to tell everybody what happened. The more you do that, the more you kind of get it out of your system. And it really does help. But the biggest thing that helps is just trusting that God has a plan for your life. God put you where you are. God wasn't surprised by the trauma that you went through. He knew exactly what would happen. And His grace is sufficient for you. His grace is sufficient for me. And everything I've been through in 23 years almost of doing this job. And so I can tell you from experience that God is bigger than your trauma. And if you change that mindset, if you have that mindset that says, I trust that God has it all under control, that He loves me, and that, I've heard people say before, God won't ever give you more than you can handle. That's a lie. God will give you more than you can handle, so that you'll have to rely on Him, because His ultimate will for your life is that you get to know Him better. So I would encourage you to seek God in that. And so do I think Turkey will attack Iran? No, I do not. That's another question. You were wearing a t-shirt with a doxy dressed in full gear. Can I get one of those? That's from Black Rifle Coffee. So you have to go get their website, I guess. I don't sell them. What can you say to me for lack of motivation? Get busy. I don't know if that helps, but Raheem, you know, everybody knows what they should do. The thing that sets successful people apart is that they can actually make themselves do what they should do and not just know what they should do. Okay. All right. So that's about all I've got for today. I'm going to pray, and I would love it if you would join me in prayer, please. So bow your heads. Lord, thank you so much for the magic of this technology that allows me to reach out to thousands of people around the world and share the hardships that are going on here in Syria so that they can pray for them and keep them in mind. Father, I ask that you would protect these people, that you would thwart the plans of evil men in Syria as they devise all kinds of evil. You would go put a hedge of protection around the Christians, the Syriac and the Armenians and the Chaldeans that are in this area, especially. And you would protect your people, Lord. Father, I pray that you would give us wisdom and discernment to know where we should go and where we shouldn't go, to know when to stop and when to turn. I pray that you'd order our steps and arrange our meetings that we have with people so that we can show your love to the people we meet. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Yeah, folks, one more quick story before I go. When we were out at that dam, after we went up to the front lines, we came back and the Kurds were dancing on top of the dam like they do every night, just as a show of force against Turkey to keep Turkey from bombing the dam. So there were about 200 of them. They're all in a big circle and they're dancing and doing their traditional dances. They had music and flags and all sorts of stuff, having a good old time. And so we were watching, and then a couple of us actually jumped in and were dancing with them. And it was a good time. But then they came over and they asked the leader of the Free Burma Rangers, Dave Eubank, to give a speech. Okay, so get the scene here. There's a couple of hundred people. The vast majority of them are Sunni Muslim, Kurds, and they're asking Dave to come and speak to them. So Dave gets up in front of them, and Dave is a rock star here in Syria. So like it's you would have thought Taylor Swift was there or something. And Dave gets up to talk to them, and he just starts sharing the good news of God's love with them, talking about Jesus. They're all filming it with their phones. The media was there, all the local media from the area around that part of Syria. They were all there. And Dave just gave him a sermon. He just preached at him. And, you know, it's so encouraging to me because when I go to these places and you look out across these fields out here like that you see behind me, and there's a couple little boys following the back end of a bunch of goats around. And I think those boys are likely never going to learn to read. And if they did, the only thing they'd be able to read, they'd be allowed to read is the Quran and the Hadith. How are they ever going to find out about Jesus, about a Savior that can redeem them? You know, how does that work? And it's kind of depressing. But then something like this happens where just out of the blue, we go to take a look at something and show up, and it's like a parade of people. We didn't know it was going to be that way. And they ask us to speak to them, and we're able to share Jesus with them. And so maybe for the first time in their lives, they heard about a loving Savior. Ahmed says Jesus is a prophet. Jesus was more than a prophet. Jesus was a Savior. He was God. God wanted to come to earth and become something that was easier for us to understand. And so just like I'm a writer and I write books, if I wanted to meet the characters in my books, I would have to write myself into the book as a character in order to meet the other characters in the book. And then I would control all the things that happen. And that's exactly what God did. If I can do it as a writer in my own books, then why couldn't God do it? If he's God, if he's the most powerful. I know Muslims have a real hard time with that. Like, no, God is there's only one. There's only one. And we agree. There is only one God. But the God we believe in is powerful enough to do whatever he wants. And if he wants to make a copy of himself and write him into the script, so to speak, on planet Earth, so that the people that he loves could see God in the flesh and understand and learn from him and see how he lives, he could set an example for them, and then live a sinless life, and then be murdered unjustly for our sins. God's powerful enough to do that. And let me just tell you something. If your God is not powerful enough to make another one of himself and put that person on earth as a human being, then you shouldn't be following. It's not a God worth following. It's not. Because if God's not all powerful, then why would we worship him? Why would we follow him? And if he is all powerful, then he can do whatever he wants. Do you get that? And God is a God of love. He's not a God that wants to judge you and tell you you've got to die the right way in order to have any shot at getting into heaven. No, all the dying's already been done for us. When Jesus died on the cross. And so we are free to live in freedom because we know the truth, people. And that truth sets you free. So if you want to know that truth, just ask Jesus. Just submit yourself to him and say, I accept the sacrifice that you gave as a gift to me so that I could be clean. And you have to be clean to get into heaven. You have to be perfect to get into heaven. Any blemish in you, if God said, well, okay, you're better than Joe here, so I'll let you into heaven. Well, if you're not perfect, then heaven wouldn't be perfect anymore, and it wouldn't be heaven. No, you've got to be perfect. And since we're not perfect, we're all sinners, we need something called propitiation. We need someone to pay that debt for us. And that's what Christ did on the cross. So I know we've got some Muslims watching. I want you to know I'm not attacking you. I love you. And Jesus loved you so much. He didn't want you to die. He was willing to die for you so that you could live forever. And all you have to do is cry out to him and submit yourself to him, and you can live for eternity in heaven. And you don't have to martyr yourself to do it. So, all right, that's all I've got, folks. Thank you very much for watching. Again, please go to the Hot Zone with Chuck Holton if you want to follow more of my reporting. I do a lot more of it over there than I do on CBN these days. But also make sure to go to cbn.com, and if you'd like to donate to help keep us in the field. These trips are expensive, and CBN is very kind to pay for my travel out here. So it really would help if you did that. So God bless you. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.